Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my running back and wide receiver rankings for week 13. This video is not going to include any of those Thanksgiving or Black Friday games. Those 4 games, let's give you a quick recap on where it was accurate and inaccurate. But afterwards, I'll tell you the injury report for both positions and then rank running backs and wide receivers. No time to waste. Let us begin. When it comes to the Packers and Lions game, Amon-Ra got hurt, so a lot of things got shifted after that happened, which was really early in the game. So Jameson Williams was a phenomenal play, and Jordan Love I did kind of underestimate, but Gibbs kind of shit the bed. Jacobs didn't score either, and then given Jacobs did play Emmanuel Wilson, I did say would not be worth starting, but I did tell you Jayden Reed might play. He did not, so Christian Watson went way off. I probably would have liked Watson had I known Reed wouldn't play. And then Dontavian Wicks also fucking had the game of his life. 25 points from Wicks in the Blunt League with, I believe, 2 touchdowns. Wicks was phenomenal. So was Jordan Love. So underestimated them a little bit. I thought this game would be a bit more low scoring, but Goff had over 20 points and Montgomery also played better than Gibbs. Montgomery had a good game. So a little bit off in this one, but the injury to Amon-Ra really shifted things. But ultimately, the Lions' run matchup did prove to be difficult. You want receivers against Detroit, not running backs. When it comes to the Chiefs and Cowboys game, everyone I told you to start did go over double digits, except for Jake Ferguson. So given his name value at the position, kind of hard to bench him. 6.1 is kind of the baseline minimum you can tolerate at tight end. So not atrocious, but definitely not a start. Like I said, otherwise everybody else popped off. Mahomes, 30 points in the Blunt League, so awesome game from him. Rashee Rice went off, and Xavier Worthy was a solid flex play, 9.4 points. Not atrocious, but that running back room looks to still favor Kareem Hunt, even off the massive volume the week prior. Kareem Hunt was better than Pacheco, but otherwise, Hollywood, my long shot, did pay off. Not too bad, but both defenses were indeed worth benching. When it comes to the Ravens-Bengals game, I may have been a little too high on Joe Burrow, but still over 21 points, at least in the Blunt League. That was pretty good. Jamar Chase had a pretty solid game. Lamar, though, Lamar shit the bed. Lamar is not looking like a safe quarterback, and next week he gets the Steelers, a team that has been his kryptonite quite often. I would probably bench Lamar next week, but Andrews, a bit lackluster. Actually, Isaiah Likely had the better game in this one, but Likely did fumble away a touchdown. Sadly, an amazing game did not happen for Isaiah Likely. I bet on a Likely touchdown in my prop projections. Of course, he didn't let it happen. But Yoshivas did score a touchdown. Not a bad game from him. Just like Xavier Worthy, a good flex play at 9 points. But Zay Flowers was a terrible call. Holy shit, Flowers. Wow, I almost forgot about him. He had a brutal negative point game with a fumble. So that was a terrible call. Gesicki did not work out. Hopefully you did not ride with Gesicki. Instead, Tanner Hudson did score a touchdown. There was a tight end touchdown available, but not for Mike Gesicki. So that was kind of it. Otherwise, my long shot, Keaton Mitchell, did score a touchdown, starting to get a bit more involved, but Derrick Henry still paid off. And then the last game to mention, I think I had kind of completely wrong. All of the players I told you to start were Eagles, and only A.J. Brown really worked out. Even Jalen Hurts had less than 20 points, so not a good call. The Eagles' defense was a terrible endorsement. Only 1 point in the Blunt League. I started him. That didn't work out. Saquon, under 10 points. Same with Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. Meanwhile, all the production was with Chicago. But the problem with the Bears is that their offense is just kind of all over the place. And while I did expect the weather to maybe favor the run, I did not endorse Swift or Monangai anywhere near as much. So they both went over 20 points in the Blunt League, but there is a boost for 100-yard games. Regardless, amazing production out of both. But Caleb, only 10 points. This game was just about the running backs. And Cole Kmet did score a touchdown. He was the only player I told you to bench that did pay off. Otherwise, I had pretty good calls. The Bears defense, though, was a solid long shot. 6 points from the Bears. Shockingly, Luther Burden, though, had the most points at receiver. Odunze and DJ Moore shit the bed. And that's where I was a little bit like, where do we go with the Bears? But running back was clearly the answer, and I did not endorse them enough. So apologies there. Otherwise, somewhat accurate. For the most part, there weren't too many misses. But that's it for the recap. If you jumped ahead in the timestamps, now it's time for the injury report at running back, where Trey Benson remains on IR for the Cardinals. Did practice all week long, was limited not just this week, but the week before, and is not going to play. So it looks like Bam Knight and Michael Carter are going to get the start and have that combination backfield again. But it looks like Michael Carter is really the only one who's fully healthy. So I would prefer Michael Carter, because if you look at Bam Knight, he's questionable for this game and limited all week in practice. So I assume he'll play, but last week Carter was more efficient, actually got more volume. And I think in this Cardinals offense, it shifts week to week. You care about receptions at running back, and I think I might prefer Michael Carter just a bit more than Bam Knight. But on top of that, Emari Demercado is out. So Michael Carter, I think, is the guy you'd rather have in Arizona. But in Cleveland, backup running back Jerome Ford is questionable with a hamstring injury. Limited Wednesday, but then didn't practice at all on Thursday or Friday. So it looked like last week Dylan Sampson really played well and may have overtaken him. I think that is definitely the case in Cleveland. It's Judkins, then Dylan Sampson, and there's some bad weather. They might run the ball a little extra with Sampson. But in Denver, we've known this for a while. J.K. Dobbins is on IR. Just a reminder that Harvey is going to be the guy. But then a player we're assuming comes off of IR this week is going to be inactive. Omarion Hampton, the rookie for the Chargers, did practice this week, limited in every single session, but is staying on IR. Not going to play. His practice window has opened, but he has not been activated. It is the Kimani Vidal show. One more week for the Chargers. But in New Orleans, Alvin Kamara is out, not going to play, so Devin Neal will split the touches with Taysom Hill. And then in Tampa Bay, Bucky Irving is expected to play. At the moment, questionable, but off of IR and full all week in practice. He will be good to go, but it's not 100% guaranteed that he gets all of the touches. I could still see a big committee involving Sean Tucker and Rachaad White, but Bucky is the main guy in Tampa. I would assume you're starting Bucky Irving. That's it for the injury report. Now let's move on to all of my rankings. We are going to begin at running back, and in tier 1, there are probably the most obvious players that you're starting. When it comes to this video, I'm not including any of those players that were active on Thursday or Friday. So Jahmyr Gibbs is not going to be included in this video. Neither is Saquon, any of the Bears players. There are 8 teams essentially on bye for the weekend. So number 1, 2, and 3, I believe, are locks in the lineup, even if we were ranking them. And I'm going to put Jonathan Taylor at number 1. When you look at Taylor's game log in division versus Houston, he torches them. He has a touchdown in all 4 of his last games and an average of 26 touches, just shy of 2 catches per game for 134 yards per game and 4 touchdowns total in those last 4 games. There was one matchup where they limited him to under 50 yards, but he still found the end zone. And otherwise, he's gone over 100 yards every single time. He's had some of his best career games against the Texans. He owns this matchup. So I hate the matchup for Pittman and the receivers. I don't think Daniel Jones will have a good game, but Jonathan Taylor, I think, will lead the Colts to victory. He is my RB1 in week 13. But Christian McCaffrey, I'm expecting to be the RB2 this week. Massive volume incoming because of the weather in Cleveland. Terrible conditions. Brock Purdy is not the same quarterback in that environment, and I expect Shanahan to dial up the run even more. So McCaffrey does rely on the passing game, so maybe that does limit him, but I'm still going to start him. I expect a touchdown guaranteed. And the Cleveland matchup is actually much easier at the moment. On the season, it's a bottom 10 matchup, but in the last 4 games, it is a top 11 matchup. So an upgrade for McCaffrey. The volume will be lights out. But Bijan Robinson against the Jets, that's definitely a matchup I want to chase. The only concern is how many touches will Tyler Algier get, and will he get vultured? So because that's a red flag that just doesn't apply for Taylor or McCaffrey, Bijan is behind them. But if you look at this matchup, it's actually the best of the 3. The Jets are ranking top 4 in terms of matchups in the last month, allowing some of the most points overall in the league to the position. So love Bijan this week. The top 3 are no-brainers. But when it comes to tier 2 at running back this week, at RB4, I believe Kyren Williams is the best option behind Bijan Robinson. If you are looking to players still remaining, I love this matchup for Kyren Williams. The Panthers are allowing top 3 numbers to the running back position at the moment. And where they're giving up a ton of volume is in the passing game, an average of 7 receptions per game over the last 4 weeks. The volume is insane. It's turning into an extra 45 receiving yards. And on top of that, they have given up 5 rushing touchdowns in the last month as well. So loving the volume for Kyren this week. Running backs have dominated against Carolina. And it's not just McCaffrey last week. Love the upside for Kyren in PPR. But typically, DeVon Achane is always a lock for PPR upside, and this Saints matchup just isn't as good. It's an average matchup on the season, no concern. Achane at RB5 this week is a lock in the lineup. Got to start DeVon Achane. But James Cook, always a lock in your lineup. Kind of the only bright spot other than Josh Allen in this offense. Kind of the only player I really trust, and especially with some injuries elsewhere, all the touches are being a bit consolidated, and the Steelers aren't a defense that is really clamped down on running back on the year. It's technically a downgrade, a bottom 11 matchup, but not so bad that I'm going to panic on James Cook. He had the Texans last week and still had a house call, made them look like an average spot. So I'm going to trust James Cook. I think he will play very well, but I could see the yards per carry be diminished. Each of the last 5 games, the maximum yards per carry the Steelers have allowed is only 4.2. On average, they're giving up less than 4 yards per carry in the last month. So good luck with the efficiency from Cook, but all you need is one play, and odds are he scores at least 1 touchdown. But TreVeyon Henderson, I am tempted to rank even higher, and if it wasn't for last week's odd usage because Rhamondre Stevenson came back, I would probably say TreVeyon could be better than Bijan this week. The matchup against the Giants is so elite. We saw Jahmyr Gibbs drop 200 plus yards, and in the Blunt League with some bonuses factoring in, he dropped 60 points last week in the Blunt League. So I am guaranteeing TreVeyon to have a big play. I don't think the Giants can stop him. I expect a massive house call, and the only player I think is really capable of that in this backfield is TreVeyon Henderson. Last week, they allowed 11.9 yards per carry. Back in week 8, they allowed 9.8 yards per carry. And on the season, they are allowing 6 yards per carry to all collective running backs. They have been garbage. And they have also allowed 6 rushing touchdowns in the last month. There is no chance I think TreVeyon burns you. The only way that happens is if Terrell Jennings and Rhamondre Stevenson are vulturing you this week. I don't think Mike Vrabel hates us that much. I am endorsing TreVeyon Henderson because it's against the Giants. I think he's a lock in the lineup in RB1, but this is kind of the last opportunity I'm giving him to remain this high in the rankings. I believe in him, but I understand the headache that is the Patriots backfield. Now we move on to tier 3, the top 12 at the position, and I think if you have a decision to be starting these players, they're kind of not as valuable as top 12 would suggest. Remember, there's 8 teams that have already played that are just not ranked. So these guys are more so like top 20 options, and odds are they're going to be solid RB2s, but some of them have some really, really elite upside this week. I love RJ Harvey against Washington. This matchup is top 5, and in the last month, it's actually top 2. The Commanders are getting torched. They are coming off a bye. Sometimes defenses wake up, but I'm not expecting that. And when it comes to touchdowns in the last 4 games, they've allowed 3 rushing touchdowns and 2 receiving touchdowns. I feel like a touchdown this week out of the Broncos backfield is a lock, and RJ Harvey will get it done. I'm expecting a lot of volume in the passing game as well. On the season, the Commanders have allowed some of the highest receiving yards per game to opposing running backs. Harvey should give you at least 20 to 30 plus yards off of catches alone. I like Harvey a lot in this matchup. I do not expect Jaleel McLaughlin to vulture him. But in terrible weather, I would expect Quinshon Judkins to remain a focal point in that Browns offense. I also expect them to still prevent Shedeur Sanders from ruining their red zone offense. Last week, we saw some wildcat on the goal line. I could see that again. And given there's a lot of wind and even some snow potentially in this game, at worst a lot of rain, I expect them to run it a little extra. We've seen the Browns lean on the run plenty of times. The coach is not afraid to do that. Kevin Stefanski loves the run game. So I like Quinshon Judkins. I'm expecting at least a touchdown and a decent volume this week, but I could see Dylan Sampson start to eat into his workload. Sampson has looked good when he's got an opportunity. At some point, his workload might come down. This week, I'm not expecting that, though. In the bad weather, Judkins will play well. But Ashton Jeanty against the Chargers, I'm a little worried about because the matchup at times is really difficult. And if you go back to week 2, when the Raiders hosted the Chargers in Las Vegas, Jeanty wasn't anything special. Only had 5.9 half PPR points, had 14 touches, 3 of them were receptions, for 44 total yards and no touchdown. The Chargers did shut down the Raiders offense entirely. There was nothing going right for Las Vegas. But this week, there is a chance that their offense looks way better because they fired Chip Kelly. And if you read the reports on what Kelly was doing, he was sabotaging their offense. So it's possible it gets better, but ultimately the offensive line is not Chip Kelly's fault. And I do think that'll be the weakness. I don't know if Jeanty will go off, but I'm expecting so much volume, especially in the passing game. He offers at least like 5 receptions every week, it seems, and that usually covers you. So I think he'll play fine. I think there is some back and forth in this game, and I could see Jeanty in some garbage time still offer a good stat line. But I could be wrong on his opponent in this matchup. I have Kimani Vidal 1 spot behind him, and I think because I was planning on Hampton all week long, I might be still a bit hesitant to fully endorse Kimani Vidal. But the news is in. Hampton is not going to play, so Vidal gets the job for 1 more game. And they get the Eagles the week after. I imagine they probably want Hampton healthy for that matchup. So Vidal going to get at least like 15 touches in my opinion. I expect them to dominate this matchup. But if you look at the Raiders defense against the running back position, this isn't the best matchup on the year. It's about league average. In the last month, though, it has upgraded to a top 12 spot. They have been a little easier to run against in the last month, especially in terms of receiving volume. Last 4 games, running backs are averaging an extra 35 yards per game. They also have a receiving touchdown against Las Vegas in those last 4 games, along with 3 rushing touchdowns as well. So, but not insane efficiency on the ground. They're also allowing only 3.8 yards per carry. So while I'm not expecting the world from Vidal, I know the volume will be there, and for that reason, I'm going to trust him. Odds are he finds the end zone, and I think he's comparably as valuable this week as Ashton Jeanty. I think in this game, both players will play well, and while I trust the Chargers offense to put up more points, I think I would still start Jeanty over Vidal because I know where the ball's going to go in Las Vegas. The volume I would expect to be safer to bet on with Ashton Jeanty. Also, last time we saw Vidal, he looked like shit, but he has been having like 1 good game followed by 1 bad game, kind of like clockwork. Since Hampton's gone down, it's been up and down with Vidal. If that trend continues, the bad game against Jacksonville last time will turn into a good game this time against Las Vegas. Good luck, but Vidal, I think, is top 12 of the running backs remaining this weekend. But I think I would start Vidal over Bucky Irving because Bucky, I don't know exactly how healthy he is. In the Bucs offense, though, I think he is worth a start. I know that they'll play well against Arizona. That defense is pretty trash, and this matchup doesn't scare me. As long as Bucky is active, then I would start him. And I assume he will be active. He's been full in practice this week, and the reports are not indicative of him getting a lion's share of the workload. But last year, he was a top 10 running back despite only getting like 55% of the workload in the second half. He was dominant on limited touches last year. So a change of pace role for him isn't the worst thing in the world, but in his first week back, I don't know if I'm expecting like 25 carries or something like that. I think there's more volume for Vidal, and Bucky might get vultured by Sean Tucker. Rashad White might also factor in. So because he actually has a backup I'm concerned about, that's why he's at the bottom of this tier, but odds are he does have higher upside than guys like Jeanty and Vidal. There's more variance, boom, bust potential with Irving, but odds are it's going to be good enough where I'd still bet on it. I doubt he burns you against the Cardinals this week. But now we move on to tier 4 at running back. And at this point, I think these players are just more flex options. While they do all rank top 18 on the weekend, I think they're closer to like number 20 overall to 25. And I do expect maybe a world where it just doesn't work out. Maybe you don't get a touchdown with some of these guys. But I do like the volume to be bet on for Travis Etienne, especially with some injuries in Jacksonville lately. That's been key for him, but Brian Thomas Jr. is coming back. That could limit some of the volume because they trust their pass catchers more. Brenton Strange also returned last week. So Etienne maybe doesn't get as many rushing opportunities. They might throw the ball more this week. The matchup is pretty good for Trevor Lawrence and the passing game. So that's where I'm a bit worried about Etienne, the volume here. And if you look at his career against the Titans in his last 4 games, he does not have a single touchdown. He has not scored a touchdown in that span. So the volume's fine, 15.5 touches per game, 3.3 receptions, 73 yards per game is okay. I'm not going to be upset if that's the stat line he offers, but because he doesn't have a single touchdown in the last 4 against the Titans, his average is just 8.9 points per game. That's a fine flex play, nothing special, but not going to burn you either. If that's the floor he offers, then I probably am going to start Travis Etienne. I don't expect you get burned against Etienne. It's been a good matchup on the year, but as of late, it's just average. So I kind of believe that these career-long stats, at least the last 4 games against this divisional opponent, are going to repeat. Not expecting the world out of Travis Etienne. Unlikely he finds the end zone and goes over 10 points. But Breece Hall, I might be ranking a bit too low because this is a spot that I just can't quite put my finger on whether it's good or not. On the year, it started off really tough against the Falcons, but in the last month, it's gotten so easy. But one of those games was against Jonathan Taylor when he dropped 50, and that does really skew the averages. So I'm not sure if Breece Hall is going to absolutely dominate, but where I do feel confident is that the Falcons are giving up a shit ton of receptions right now. In the last month, Atlanta has allowed an average of 5.5 running back receptions for an average of 50 receiving yards per game, along with 4 receiving touchdowns on the year. In the last month, that hasn't hit, but on the year, there have been a decent collection of receiving touchdowns. So I think Breece Hall, where he contributes, where you can trust him, is in the passing game. Otherwise, I don't feel confident on the ground whatsoever. And a touchdown, I think, is really hard to trust from Breece Hall. But this week, I could see a similar stat line to last, where even on just like 4 receptions, he goes over 50 receiving yards. I expect Tyrod Taylor to be checking it down quite often. The Falcons have been vulnerable to pass catching running backs. So I like the floor for Breece Hall this week, but not the ceiling. In general, 13 points is kind of like the maximum you're going to get from Breece if he doesn't score a touchdown. And touchdowns are just so rare for him. Other than the Bengals game, it's been really hard to trust that potential for Breece Hall. So I like his talent, but just don't really like the offense he plays in. And for those circumstances, ideally, that's just a flex play in your lineup. So good luck with Breece, but compared to some other options, I trust him a little bit more in terms of floor. I think it'll be an easier path to like 80 yards than anyone remaining on the list. But this week, I like both of the Steelers running backs. Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell, I think, are top 20 options, and at worst, like high-end flex plays. After last week's game, I think you can trust both of them because Warren is getting a lot of carries. He's running the ball quite often, and especially against Buffalo, that's what you want. The Bills are a top 3 matchup this season for running backs, and if you look at the rushing stats, they're allowing 5.6 yards per carry this season. They've also allowed 14 rushing touchdowns in 11 games this year. Last week, they didn't give up a touchdown to Woody Marks or Nick Chubb, but that was only the second game on the season without at least one running back scoring a rushing touchdown. So I would expect that to come back to the Steelers offense. They played really well at home, and especially in this matchup, you want running backs against the Bills. Last week, I endorsed Woody Marks. It didn't quite pay off without a touchdown, but he still had over 70 yards, and he was still kind of usable from a floor standpoint. So the Steelers are pivoting towards a run-first offense given their quarterback injury situation. I think Rodgers is going to play, but still I expect him to hand it off quite often. He does not want to get hit easiest way to avoid that, give it to the running back. So Warren, I could see get 20 rush attempts this week. I think the volume will be there, and I do think he scores a touchdown, most likely. But there is a chance there's only one touchdown available, and it might get vultured by Kenny Gainwell. So for that reason, because Breece Hall is in a backfield all to himself, while I'm not expecting a touchdown for Hall, I still think he's a safer play than the Steelers. Two options, but higher upside in my opinion for Warren. And then if you play in full PPR, then I'd rather have Gainwell straight up. I'm expecting a lot of receptions for Kenny G because that's what he offers. In this offense, there aren't that many receivers in the first place. And if they're leaning on running back, expect Gainwell to continue his dominance. He's played too well for them to ignore him, and Arthur Smith wants to use running back in the first place. So Kenny Gainwell, a solid flex play, and I would rather go Steelers backfield than Seahawks backfield. I think Charbonnet and Walker are a little bit less safe this week against the Vikings because it's the Sam Darnold revenge game. I could see Darnold like really dominate for touchdowns, and that's kind of the only way that Charbonnet is usable. Charbonnet vultures Walker almost every single time, unless it's against the Rams or he gets hurt. So Charbonnet, I still prefer over Walker. I would expect a touchdown for him above Kenneth Walker, but that's kind of just the upside argument, and a path for like 10 plus points is usually there for Charbonnet. Walker is often capped at like 9 because he only gives you yardage. But this week, I think the yardage will be fine. Against Minnesota, I think they'll be used, but probably not on the goal line because I think Darnold will just crush in the passing game. The Vikings matchup isn't like the best you could find. On the year, it's number 20, so slightly below average. In the last month, though, it's number 13, just above average. So in my book, I'm not upgrading either player, and they become pretty touchdown dependent. I prefer Charbonnet to punch it in for a score, but Walker, I think, has a slightly safer floor. I think they're fine flex options, but not my favorite this week. I'd rather go Gainwell, who maybe you got off the wire just a couple weeks ago. At this point, however, I think we're at the bottom of the flex tier, and odds are I'd like to bench them if I can, but some of them probably still crack the top 25, even when we include all of the players I'm not ranking who have already suited up. So there are a couple guys in this tier I would still most likely have in my lineup. Most notably, Rico Dowdle is definitely a player I'm still probably considering a high-end flex play. But last week, the volume was crazy. I didn't understand why they completely went away from him. I know the game script wasn't good, but still, he's your best offensive player, and the passing game wasn't working out. So they kind of just refused to run the ball. Maybe they learned from their mistakes. They're usually much better at home than on the road. So I still think Dowdle's fine, but last week was just so unencouraging, I have to downgrade him. The matchup as well is brutal. The Rams have been the third toughest matchup on the season, and they've only given up 3 rushing touchdowns all year long. So if there's a matchup where a touchdown is typically not something you want to bet on, it is against the LA Rams. So Rico gets a big downgrade for that. And then because I don't know what the volume will look like, I don't think he's as safe as someone like Kenneth Walker. So not a lock in the lineup this week, just an average low-end flex play. And at best, you're hoping that the volume comes back, but I could see even with high volume, he doesn't find the end zone, still caps out at about 8 points because I just don't really trust this matchup at all. The Rams also hold you back in terms of yardage a lot. It's bottom 5 for a reason, not just touchdown production. So Dowdle, not as safe, but still most likely in the flex conversation this week. But Woody Marks, I think, is kind of the last starter I'm somewhat confident flexing, and ideally I'd rather bench him because against the Colts it's not a good matchup this year. It ranks 21st on the season, so bottom 12, but in the last month maybe that is turning around. In just the last 4 games, the Colts have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to the position, an average of 25 per game to opposing backfields. And although it's still kind of split between Woody Marks and Chubb, if there's one player I would expect to get the bulk of carries and opportunity, it's definitely Woody Marks. So potentially some upside, but last week that's what I thought for him, and he still did not score a touchdown, even against Buffalo, which has been a top 3 matchup on the year. I thought a touchdown would be guaranteed. It was not. So that's where I can't fully endorse Woody Marks as like an automatic upgrade, but he does catch passes, and the Colts give up a lot of receiving yards. 5.3 receptions per game the last month, along with 36 receiving yards per game. That is well above average. League average is around 22, 23. More than 30 is a nice spot. So I trust that aspect of Woody Marks' game, especially with Stroud coming back. I do think he has a better rapport in that checkdown department with CJ Stroud. And a touchdown's not the worst bet to make. The Colts have also given up 6 rushing touchdowns in the last 4 games. If that is going to go to someone, it would go to Woody Marks. So good luck with Woody. I could see it pay off, but last week that's what I thought, and I don't want to get burned again. So for that reason, he's just a average flex option. I think the last guy I would endorse in my lineup to project about 10 points. I think odds are in this matchup, he can still get about 10 points because of his passing game usage. I think that'll be the saving factor for Woody Marks. Perhaps 4 receptions this week for Woody. But Tyler Algier, I think, is where we're just benching players at this point. It feels a bit too cute to be starting backups. But if there's one I kind of trust to still get a lot of touches, it's Tyler Algier. And against the Jets, why not? The Jets don't scare you at all. In the last month, the Jets are a top 4 matchup, and it's a pretty safe spot, in my opinion. But a touchdown's ultimately what you need to bet on for Algier. And last 2 games, the Jets have given up 4 total touchdowns on the ground. In the last 4, it's up to 6 total touchdowns. So love that opportunity for Algier. It just needs to hit. And against the Jets, it's definitely possible, but it's never a full safe endorsement on Algier any given week. He could really dominate, but I'm expecting Bijan to be the safer option, and for that reason, let's probably pump the brakes on Algier. But he does crack my top 30, is a decent flex option, but just a depth piece in general. Odds are you probably have more players to start than Algier. Like, I would not have endorsed Algier above guys like Swift and Monungai. I would have much rather gone with one of those players than Algier. And at this point, you probably can afford to be benching a backup running back and maybe just pivoting to wide receiver. But I could see it work out. A touchdown is kind of what you're chasing at this point. But there's pretty safe volume incoming for Devin Neal. Last week, while Taysom Hill did have 10 carries, the efficiency wasn't quite there. And Neal, I kind of trust for more receptions in this offense. But the Saints are not an offense I really trust in general. Even with Kamara, there was no touchdown upside. So against the Dolphins, let's pump the brakes, wait and see. I'm going to tell you to bench Devin Neal this week, most likely. A very low-end flex play just because he's a starter. That's why he's in this tier. But at this point, I don't think I want to endorse it. Let's wait and see. Against the Dolphins, it's not a good spot lately. It ranks as a bottom 10 matchup in the last 4 games. They're also coming off a bye, and I could see them dominate a little extra. They've only allowed 1 rushing touchdown in the last 4 games, and most of the production they do allow is in the passing game. I still just don't really trust Tyler Shuck right now. So let's just wait on Devin Neal. His schedule down the stretch isn't that bad, but this week against the Dolphins, this matchup is actually a downgrade. So let's avoid him. I don't know what you're going to get, so I would rather pass, but I understand being desperate enough where you're forced to start Devin Neal. Aaron Jones, I really don't want to be trusting this week. The Seahawks are a terrible matchup, and other than the backup quarterback maybe handing it off like crazy, that's the only argument I can think of why you would trust Aaron Jones. Volume, I think, is the only silver lining with Max Brosmer under center. But Seattle has been a very difficult matchup on the year, and I don't want to press my luck. Even with 18 plus touches, Aaron Jones probably doesn't give you more than 7.5 points. I would probably just bench him. I don't even think that floor is safe to bet on. I could see a world where you get less than 4 points from Aaron Jones. The Vikings, I think, are going to have one of the worst offenses in the league this week. Terrible spot against Seattle in the first place. And then when you factor in the 3rd string quarterback and the Darnold revenge game, the Seahawks are going to play well for Sam Darnold, and Brosmer really scares me. The boxes will be stacked on Aaron Jones, but maybe Brosmer's much better than JJ McCarthy. Maybe that offense is better than I expect. There is a chance, but volume is the only scenario where it works out, and odds are he's still not efficient enough for it to matter. So no thanks with Aaron Jones. I think I'm going to pass. But honestly, Michael Carter is kind of tempting. I prefer Michael Carter over Bam Knight. But even that, I don't think is enough to move the needle and endorse him as a safe start. Just a low-end flex play if you're desperate. That's the main argument to be making. There is some upside against Tampa. This matchup has been good. The Bucs are just really inept on defense. But against the run, in the last 4 games, they're no longer top 10. They're top 10 on the year. In the last month, they're now number 17 and much more league average. So not as good as you might think, but not terrible either. Carter is getting receptions, and that's kind of the only value. In full PPR, I'd rather go Carter than perhaps Tyler Algier, but not enough to like lock into the lineup. It's possible that Bam Knight is actually the guy you want, and that's where Carter becomes very tricky to bet on. So no thanks with him. If I can avoid it, I would. But against the Bucs, it's possibly a shootout. There is some upside here. I could talk myself into it if I was super desperate. I could see less upside, but a higher floor for someone like Aaron Jones. So I'm more of a floor play type of guy. I'd rather bet on the volume for Jones. But the upside for Carter, I think, might be higher in this matchup. But Rhamondre Stevenson, rounding out this tier, is sadly still a vulture candidate and still could have a phenomenal game against the Giants. The Giants defense cannot stop the run whatsoever, but I'm only going to trust TreVeyon if I can drop Rhamondre. I wish I could, but he's still just a bench stash, and it's just Mike Vrabel kind of hating the fantasy upside of TreVeyon. But TreVeyon, I think, will have that house call ability. Rhamondre could still fumble it away, and if it wasn't against the Giants, I wouldn't even consider Rhamondre in the top 30. So no thanks. I think at this point you do want to be benching everyone, given there are 8 teams with running backs that are not ranked. But now we've hit tier 6, and at this point I am 100% telling you to bench all of these players. Some of them are still starters, but I hate their matchups. I hate their game script this week. I really don't trust any of them beyond this point. So no thank you with Devin Singletary. I think the more valuable Giants running back, and potentially in a shootout against the Patriots, it's possible it'll work out. But if you look at the matchup on the year, it is the toughest, and they never give up touchdowns. So while I do think Singletary is more likely to find his way into the goal line and actually get you those 6 points, I wouldn't start him against New England. This has been the worst matchup you could ask for. So no thanks with Singletary. And although Tracy is like right there with him in terms of volume, I haven't seen enough from him to turn it into fantasy production. I don't think Tracy offers more upside than Singletary. So although you might feel differently about it, both of them are kind of the same, and I'd rather hope for a touchdown. I feel better betting on that with Singletary than Tyrone. So bench both of them. I hate the Patriots matchup, but Sean Tucker might still factor in Tampa Bay. I think he is going to be more valuable than Rachaad White, and I don't know what the status is on Bucky, if he's 100% or not. While he's full, I'm expecting Bucky to play. I don't think Bucky will get more than 60% of the touches this week. I think they ramp him up, and I do think Tucker still factors in, especially on the goal line, might be a vulture candidate this week. Not atrocious, but I would bench him. I'm not going to tell you to start Sean Tucker, but I'm also not going to tell you to start Bam Knight, given his injury. I think Michael Carter is a bit safer. And in this backfield, there's not many rush attempts in the first place. You're hoping for catches, and Jacoby Brissett chucks it down the field. Not as much to the running back. So you'll be okay for like 6 points, but at that point, what's the point at all? I think you should bench Bam Knight. And Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard, they're in like a 50-50 committee. My preference is Spears because I think he's more explosive. He is younger and I think more talented in my opinion. But he catches slightly more receptions. That's the main reason he gets the tiebreaker over Pollard. But I'm not expecting anything from either. The Jags have been a bottom 5 matchup this year, and a touchdown I don't think is guaranteed ever in this backfield. If one of them had it all to themselves, I wish it was Spears because Pollard proved he didn't do much with that volume. Spears, I think, is the only one worth really rostering down the stretch. The only one with potential high-end upside. But even that is very unlikely with this backfield. No thanks on Tennessee. Either running back, Spears or Pollard, I would bench. And then Jordan Mason hoping for a touchdown, but against the Seattle defense, no thanks. I'm not going to bet on it. And with the backup quarterback, there might be extra handoffs, but in general, Mason is not that efficient, even on limited volume. So no thanks with him. I'd rather go him than JCM, though. Against Denver, I don't trust this offense whatsoever. And on top of that, the Commanders' backfield is extremely difficult to trust as well. JCM, I still think, has the more upside in general, going to get more touches than anyone else, but not a lock on the goal line. In general, Chris Rodriguez is vulturing him on the goal line. If anything, a touchdown is more likely to go to Chris Rodriguez. But this week against Denver, I don't want either of them. I think Rodriguez is even less enticing. But at this point in this bottom tier, there is nothing other than a touchdown that you're betting on. So I think it's most likely to go to Chris Rodriguez than any other player in tier 7. But at this point in the rankings, they're probably not cracking my top 40 if we didn't have any players that were unranked. And I would never be telling you to start Chris Rodriguez. So let's pass on him. I'm also going to pass on Bijan Robinson, but on occasion he does factor in. It is sometimes a 1A, 1B in Jacksonville, but in a division game, I could see the Titans kind of play well on defense and maybe not offer a second touchdown. So I'm only going to trust Travis Etienne this week. I'm not going to tell you Bijan Robinson has enough value to start. Let's bench the backup in Jacksonville, but I'm also going to bench the backup for the Rams. The matchup is not bad. The Panthers are actually allowing top 3 numbers if you look at the last month, but in the passing game is mainly where you can really torch them, and Blake Corum is not the pass catcher that Kyren Williams is. So not expecting that to pay off. You need a vulture touchdown, and that's the same category as Chris Rodriguez. I will bench Blake Corum, but does factor in a little bit. Not going to pretend he's irrelevant. But Rachaad White, now that Bucky Irving comes back, is even less safe. I think he already kind of had less value than Sean Tucker, so I'll bench him for sure. But could see some receptions factor in for Rachaad. Against Arizona, might be a shootout. But Jaleel McLaughlin scored a touchdown last time we saw him. I think that was just kind of to ingratiate him into the offense, let him know, we're going to need you. You are a part of this team now. Now that Dobbins is on IR, they do need McLaughlin a little bit, but I only trust Harvey. I don't trust the volume here, and that touchdown feels pretty unlikely to repeat. Let's bench McLaughlin. I doubt it works out, but Chuba Hubbard against the Rams, not expecting a touchdown for even Rico Dowdle, so no chance I'm expecting Chuba Hubbard to work out. He's barely giving you more than like 6 touches per game at this point. But Nick Chubb has a interesting matchup against the Colts, but where you can beat them is in the passing game at running back or on the goal line. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, you get probably nothing out of Nick Chubb this week. So let's bench him. I only trust Woody Marks. And then Ty Johnson, just a big gamble, hoping for a house call. The Bills' offense is weird. The ball goes in random directions. It does pay off at times, but if it doesn't, you'll get a maximum of 3 touches from Ty Johnson, and that is worthless. Too much risk on Ty Johnson. But I could also see Mike Vrabel say fuck you to us again and let Terrell Jennings score against the Giants. The Giants are just such a good matchup. Jennings, Stevenson, both have vulture potential, but I only am trusting TreVeyon Henderson. So that is it at running back, my top 42 among the remaining running backs available. I think once you hit Woody Marks at RB20, that is the cutoff point where I am no longer comfortable endorsing them. At that point, I think you're just chasing touchdowns. And while some players do have good matchups and good volume incoming, I really don't trust anyone beyond Rico Dowdle. I think that's the last player I think is like a safe start. Him and Woody Marks, even in this tier though, I think is emblematic of the risk you're getting. Beyond Jaylen Warren, Kenny Gainwell, Charbonnet, and Walker. I think that's kind of the cutoff point. Starting with Etienne, I think we're in the flex territory pretty firmly. Up until Aaron Jones, it all feels like a big gamble. And then once you hit Michael Carter, boy, you are desperate. You are not likely to win if you start Michael Carter, but could be wrong on some of those low-end options. There's always a chance that one of those Titans or Giants running backs does score. We could see Jordan Mason also factor in again. Who knows? Maybe one of those dark horses does pay off. But I'm definitely benching the Commanders backfield. That's the last starter to mention. JCM, very low on the list. But that's it at this position. Now, time for the injury report at wide receiver, where in Arizona, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a game time decision, limited all week in practice. And I think he'll play, but questionable, not a guarantee. Had appendix surgery 2 weeks ago and may not be 100%. It's possible they hold him out one more week just to be cautious. I think their season's over in terms of playoff contention, but he probably wants to play. If he's ready to go, I assume he'll be active. So let's keep an eye out on MHJ, but I assume a game time decision will show he's active. Drake London, not going to play. He's ruled out. He was doubtful all week, so not a surprise. And then in Buffalo, Josh Palmer is questionable. Limited Wednesday and Friday, but that was around a DNP on Thursday. So he's actually the number 2 in Buffalo, especially without Kincaid and Keon being a healthy scratch. Palmer actually moves the needle just barely. Don't think I'm starting him, though. Brian Thomas Jr. in Jacksonville is active. He was full on Thursday and Friday. He will play at the Titans. In Las Vegas, Tyler Lockett is questionable, appears to be moving into the wide receiver 1 position. However, on Wednesday, he was full, and then he was downgraded to limited on Thursday with an ankle and quad injury. So a game time call, not totally sure about Lockett. At his age, it's not good to see a downgrade midweek in practice. So I don't think I want a Raiders receiver. Bad matchup this week, and Lockett isn't 100%. In New Orleans, Chris Olave is questionable with a back injury, limited Wednesday, and then didn't practice Thursday, but then back limited on Friday. I assume he's going to play. It sounds like they're expecting him on the field. But in New York for the Giants, Wan'Dale Robinson questionable with an ankle, limited all week in practice, and I assume he will play. He got a ton of volume last week. But Darius Slayton, questionable with a hamstring injury, played through it last week, and he returned to the field. I assume he will keep playing. He was also limited all week long. But Garrett Wilson for the Jets is on IR. He may not come back this year. But in Tennessee, Elic Ayamanor, questionable with a hamstring injury, didn't play last week, but then limited all week in practice. I assume Ayamanor is coming back to the field. So maybe Chimeri DK less valuable, but at the moment, I don't know how much value Ayamanor even has. And then last player to mention, Terry McLaurin of the Commanders is active. He was full all week in practice. He will play, and that is positive news, but it does not look like Jayden Daniels will be back. He was practicing, but Mariota will get the start. So that's it for the injury report. Now let's move on to all of my rankings. Now let's move on to wide receiver, where just like running back, we do have 8 teams that have already played, and essentially consider them on bye. You're not going to see any of those Lions, Packers, Cowboys, Chiefs, Bengals, or Ravens, along with the Eagles or Bears. None of those wide receivers are ranked for the rest of this video. So we're only focusing on the weekend. Let us begin with the top 5, where if you have any of these players, I think they're just locked into your lineup. They feel like no-brainers, and especially with a lot of big names already taken out, the list gets really thin beyond the top 5. I'm not going to lie to you. It starts to get gross even in tier 2. So if you have JSN, he's the number 1 receiver this season, and he will play lights out against the Vikings. I know he wants to show up for Darnold in that revenge game. So 100% JSN going over 100 yards this week, and Puka and Adams are locks in the lineup. Adams is scoring a touchdown, if not 2 every week, and Puka goes over 100 yards as well. These 2 are no-brainers. Let's not waste much time on Stafford's top options. But it looks like Baker Mayfield is going to play, so as long as that's the case in Tampa, I am locking in Egbuka to my lineup. I know last week he was a bit uninspiring, but the volume is so guaranteed. Arizona is not a defense I really fear, and although they do have one corner I have hyped up, against Egbuka, I'm not going to trust Will Johnson to stop him. So let's keep Egbuka in the lineup. That feels like it would be pretty stupid to bench him. I would only get worried on Egbuka if Teddy Bridgewater had to take over. If you told me it was Teddy B this week, I might drop down Egbuka like 2 or 3 tiers. He would be just a high-end flex play, not a safe start with Teddy B. But Baker will play, so no-brainer. Egbuka is in the lineup. And Nico Collins did miss out on touchdowns last week, but he did still have like 7 points, and that would have been a safer play if you gave him a touchdown than Jayden Higgins or Christian Kirk, who did vulture him last week. I doubt that happens again. If anything, the Christian Kirk touchdown is one of the least repeatable things to expect in Houston. So odds are things come back to him. Against the Colts, it's not like an ideal matchup, though. It's just like trusting Nico Collins and his pedigree. It's not like Sauce Gardner makes you excited to go up against. So I could see it really burn you, but last week we were worried about Rashee Rice a little bit, and that didn't matter. So I'm not going to panic. Once you see the rest of the names, I think you're going to understand why Nico has to stay in the top 5. There's no name I trust more than Nico Collins remaining. And if you look at his stats against this division rival, Nico Collins in his last 4 games versus Indianapolis is averaging 7.3 targets per game, 6 receptions per game, and 121 yards per game, has 2 touchdowns in his last 4 games. So you might miss out on the touchdown. That's only a 50-50 bet according to recent history in division against the Colts. But he usually goes over 100 yards. There have been very few instances where he's been limited. As long as Stroud is his quarterback, he is really, really playing well against the Colts. So I would start him this week. I would expect Nico to play well. With Stroud back, I still think he'll be productive despite the Sauce Gardner shadow coverage that does kind of scare you a little bit. But in tier 2, tell me who you think is a safer play than Nico Collins. None of these guys, I think, have the guaranteed floor that you might think they have. While they all have elite upside, I think they could all be better than Nico this week. I don't trust them to not burn you as much as I trust Nico Collins in general. So maybe I'm a bit too high on Nico, but I do think he's better than all 6 of these wide receivers. But my preference in this tier is Khalil Shakir, strictly because of volume. There is no other weapon in Buffalo that I really think threatens him whatsoever. Kincaid, I don't think is coming back. It's possible he was limited in practice this week, but honestly, I don't really know what's the deal with Kincaid. Even if he plays, I still expect Shakir to be a 10 target guy, because that's typically what he's offering this year. And especially with the injury to Keon Coleman last week, even after the fumble, they had no choice but to go back to him. So there is no chance he gets in the doghouse, even if there's another fumble. I trust Shakir to pay off, and Josh Allen looked like he really trusted him last week. The uptick in volume, I think, will be consistently there for Shakir rest of season, given Kincaid's injury and Keon being a healthy scratch. There is no receiving threat in Buffalo, I think, is better. So he plays with Josh Allen, that offense scores points, and I'm trusting the targets to keep coming. So I'm going to tell you to start Khalil Shakir. The Steelers have been a top 2 matchup this season for receivers, and I don't see a reason to downgrade him given the volume I can expect. So perhaps, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm a little insane, but last week he had well over 100 yards, and they were manufacturing touches for him. Even a hook and ladder lateral did work out in favor of Shakir. So maybe another game with over 100 yards. I think the upside's pretty high, and a touchdown probably finds its way to him pretty soon. In Buffalo, I imagine that'll happen pretty soon. So let's start Khalil Shakir this week. I trust him despite some bad games at times. And then Ladd McConkey in LA for the Chargers. Sometimes it's just a bit too random to know where the ball is going to go. But I do know that he's the number 1 wide receiver in LA, but still sometimes that doesn't turn into a touchdown. Sometimes he does kind of burn you. And this week with Justin Herbert against Las Vegas, I am going to trust him. In his last 3 career games against Las Vegas, he has a minimum of 5 receptions in every game, an average of 61 yards per game, and he has scored a touchdown, an average of 10.6 points per game against Las Vegas. But we've seen his volume pretty high last time he's been on the field. That game against Jacksonville, I kind of write off entirely. That game was just so weird. I am still expecting the Chargers offense to be pretty lights out. And with Hampton not coming back, they're still going to throw it like crazy. The Raiders are a good matchup for receivers. It's been a top 5 matchup on the season, and I am expecting touchdowns to be there. I'm thinking one of them goes to Ladd McConkey. If you tell me QJ and Keenan play so well he shits the bed, I'd be pissed, but I wouldn't be entirely surprised. I would be shocked, though. I would expect the safest option in LA to be Ladd, but he still has a bit of risk. That's where, even though Nico has a bad matchup, I'd rather still go with Nico Collins. But Jalen Waddle gets a solid spot here against the Saints, but last time we thought he got an amazing matchup against Washington, and it didn't work out. So because Darren Waller is coming back to the lineup, I'm assuming that'll take place in Miami this week. There's a chance that Waddle does not score a touchdown. Waller is like so utilized on the goal line that could be a problem for Waddle down the stretch. But in general, the volume is pretty safe. The floor is usually like 75 plus yards for Waddle. And these days, once Tyreek Hill went down, this offense is pretty productive. They will have an advantage with the heat and humidity this week. And off the bye, I do think Tua plays well against the Saints. So I'm trusting Waddle. His talent, I think, will be on display against New Orleans. This team plays well at home, and I don't think that Madrid game is something to read into too much. I'm going to think that that was just a fluke because it was the first ever Madrid game we've ever seen, and then they were going on by weird circumstances led to the Dolphins not stepping up on offense last time. So Waddle, I think, is still a safe play, but has burned you at times, so still not as safe as Nico Collins. But in the top 12, I would definitely start him among the receivers remaining. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., it looks like he will play. So as long as he's active, I will start him. Jacoby Brissett is offering elite upside. And I was tempted to put Harrison even higher than Egbuka. I could see Harrison more valuable than Egbuka this week. Wouldn't be shocked at all because Michael Wilson has been so dominant with Harrison out. This offense is a pass-first machine. So Harrison going to get at least 10 targets if he's 100%. But the reason I couldn't rank him in the tier above and like 10 spots higher, like there's a chance he's the number one receiver this week. It is possible. The Bucs defense doesn't scare you whatsoever, but he's coming off that appendix surgery and I don't expect him to be 100%. I could see a diminished snap share for Harrison. So just not a guaranteed lock in the lineup. Like there is a world where he doesn't even play. While I am assuming he's active, he is questionable at this point in time and hasn't logged a full practice yet. So Harrison could still burn you. Could also be a game time inactive. That is the risk with Marvin Harrison Jr. But against Tampa Bay, given Brissett is popping off, I would start him if he's healthy. As long as he's on the field, I don't think I would bench Marvin Harrison Jr. And given Wan'Dale's production, I wouldn't bench him either, but maybe Jackson Dart doesn't have the same chemistry as Jameis Winston. The Winston effect is so tangible, so clear and obvious. Pretty much every receiver in fantasy gets a big boost with Jameis Winston. Just look at Jerry Jeudy last year. He's been ass this season. So Wan'Dale may not play as well as last week, but even with Jackson Dart, I still trust him, and the volume has been really consistent. In this offense, he is a lock for the most targets. So trusting Wan'Dale, that game against New England could be a shootout when you really think about it. I don't think Dart will be that inept on offense where their passing game doesn't contribute. So Wan'Dale, a very safe play last week, was a resounding endorsement. He looks really good. And New England actually is a big upgrade at the moment. On the year, it's a neutral average matchup, but in the last month, it's actually a top 8 spot. They have allowed 8 receiving touchdowns in the last 4 games. A lot of receivers have scored touchdowns on New England. So I could see him be even more valuable than where I'm ranking him. I have him at number 10, so I'm definitely telling you to start him. And given all the players that have already suited up that are unranked, he's probably closer to number 20 when you really think about it. But that is still a player I am telling you should be in the lineup. The volume will be there. The floor is very safe, and the upside indicates the Patriots will let him score a touchdown. Odds are that'll happen. There's been 8 touchdowns the last 4 games for wide receivers against New England. Start Wan'Dale if you have him. But if you have Troy Franklin, I'm also going to start him. He started to overtake Courtland Sutton before the bye when we last saw him. So against Washington, this matchup has been elite this year, a top 5 spot for receivers all year long. And similar to someone like Torrey Horton, I could see just an elite performance out of Troy Franklin this week. If you look at the last 4 games by Washington, they have allowed 7 wide receiver touchdowns in that span. A touchdown is very likely to hit for a Broncos receiver. And at the moment, I do prefer Troy Franklin, so I will rank him above Courtland Sutton, but I don't think he's that much more valuable, just a little bit safer based on his recent track record. I think he's the best Broncos receiver to roster and start this week. But in tier 3, I think all these players are like high-end flex options. They're in the top 18 among players remaining, but on the week, they're going to be closer to like number 25, maybe even a little closer to number 30. We're a bit more in the flex territory at this point, but I do think that Stefon Diggs is one of the safer floor plays you can find. The Patriots offense is kind of weird right now. It's not really easy to predict where the touchdown's going to go. And then last time we saw him against Cincinnati, he didn't really do anything. It was a heavy Hunter Henry game, and even Austin Hooper had more yards than Diggs. But on the year, Diggs has been very reliable, very safe. I don't think just because their bye week is coming up that New England will shit the bed on offense. So I think they finish their job before they go on vacation. I think Diggs will play well against the Giants. That game feels like a potential shootout. I don't think Dart will let that game just turn into a massive game script for running the ball. I could see a big back and forth and maybe even an upset win by the Giants. So Diggs, I think, will be very involved, very consistently targeted, and I trust at least like 60 plus yards most of the time for Diggs. There have been instances with over 100, and although Booty is back in the lineup, there have been touchdowns increasing for Diggs as well. So a good, safe play. I don't think there's any reason to be panicked on Diggs. I can tolerate one game and move on, not read too much into it. I think Diggs is still a safe start. But Olave, I am downgrading a bit because the matchup against Miami is not ideal. The Dolphins, shockingly, have a good secondary this season. On the year, they rank as a bottom 8 matchup, number 25 in terms of fantasy points allowed. On the season, in 11 games, the Dolphins have given up 10 wide receiver touchdowns, but that's kind of average. And in general, the yardage is much more diminished. Only 110 wide receiver yards per game against the Dolphins. That is well below the average of 143 wide receiver yards per game allowed. So Olave, I don't think will be as effective this week, but because there are no other weapons in this offense other than Juwan Johnson, and especially with Kamara going down, I would still trust the floor on Olave. In general, he's bust proof, will still get you 9 points, even if he doesn't have a good game. So let's keep Olave in the lineup. You could find the end zone, but without it, I think you might get a little fewer yards than you're used to. But Brian Thomas Jr., I think, is a high-end flex play this week. I'm likely going to start him because of who he is and because of the matchup. It's pretty good against Tennessee. On the year, Tennessee has allowed the second most fantasy points to wide receivers in the NFL. In the last month, they've allowed 6 wide receiver touchdowns and also 190 yards per game. But while I love Trevor Lawrence in this matchup, I don't know exactly what I'm going to get out of Brian Thomas Jr. in his first game back off a high ankle sprain. High ankle sprains are very, very serious. While he was practicing the last 3 weeks, he only is returning to the lineup now, and I don't know for sure how many snaps he's going to play, but I would expect him to still be the more valuable receiver in Jacksonville, and given this matchup is so elite, I would likely start him. But because of his injury status, that's why I'm pumping the brakes. He's been kind of afraid of getting hit at times this year and also kind of up and down. Thomas is not really returning the value expected when you drafted him. So for that reason, I'd rather go with someone like Olave or Diggs, but just barely. I still see a lot of upside with Thomas, and I could be ranking him like 10 spots too low given the matchup. The Titans are very vulnerable, but I have seen Jacoby Myers kind of play well since being traded to the Jaguars. I've also seen Parker Washington really contribute, and then now they also have Brenton Strange. The run game matchup is also kind of ideal as well for Jacksonville. So I kind of feel like this game is a little unlikely to be a massive, massive shootout on their end. It's still in division, and I could see the Titans kind of limit Trevor Lawrence a little bit, but I just think the ball will be spread around so much, and for that reason, I don't know exactly how much volume Brian Thomas Jr. is going to get, but odds are he plays well on it. The Titans aren't a defense that scares me. They've also have some injuries in the secondary. Thomas should get open for a deep play, and maybe it is a house call. So very elite upside with Thomas this week. I could understand ranking him in the top 7 or 8, but because he's coming off an injury, that's why I'm going to downgrade him just slightly and pump the brakes. I'm still considering him a very high-end flex option. Technically, I have him at 15 among the wide receivers remaining, but odds are that's going to be closer to wide receiver like 22, 23 if you don't include the players unranked, and odds are I'm still going to start him. Odds are I have Thomas in my lineup this week. But there is some similar risk with someone like Darnell Mooney because of his track record this season, but I do like that Kirk Cousins is his quarterback. He has no chemistry with Penix. He's never had a good game with Michael Penix. Meanwhile, last week, once London went down, he was the number one wide receiver with Cousins. He played pretty well. So it'll happen again this week. London is not going to play, so Mooney will get a lot of targets and will have some upside. Against the Jets, I think Mooney is a fine, average flex play, a good option, probably going to find the end zone as well. I think he has legit floor and ceiling outcomes. I feel pretty safe endorsing Darnell Mooney, one of the few number one receivers remaining I feel good about. So high-end flex play, odds are I'm starting Darnell Mooney in week 13. But Michael Wilson, I still think has value in Arizona, but if Marvin Harrison Jr. returns, it's definitely diminished. But we have seen Greg Dortch play pretty well as the number 2 last couple games. So Michael Wilson would just take on that role. And even when Harrison was healthy before he had appendicitis, Wilson was actually doing okay with Brissett. Brissett is just throwing it so much that he can sustain a third target wide receiver. He has McBride, he has Harrison. Those guys are going off this week, but even Wilson has touchdown upside and still should get about 6 targets or so like Dortch was seeing last couple games. So I still think Wilson is fine, and against Tampa, it's not a bad matchup at all. The Bucs are very vulnerable. In the last month, they've also allowed top 2 numbers to the position with 5 receiving touchdowns in just the last 3 games, along with an average of 198 receiving yards per game. They have been absolute garbage in the secondary this year. So love the upside, love the shootout potential. I think Michael Wilson has very high outcomes, like the matchup, like every circumstance this week with Michael Wilson. But Courtland Sutton, I might be ranking like 5 or so spots too low. He might deserve to be back-to-back with Troy Franklin, but I have seen some bad games from Sutton that have really made me consider if he's actually the guy you want in Denver. And for that reason, I think I'm going to rank him behind Troy Franklin by a full tier. I think he's much more of a flex play, whereas Franklin, I think, is a wide receiver 2 with upside. So Sutton gets a great matchup. That's the reason why I am endorsing him still as a good start, but I could see him as just the number 2 option in this offense. And I also could see a great game from Harvey. Even Evan Ingram, I think, could pop off. And what is the volume going to look like if that does happen? So if Franklin, Ingram, and Harvey have good games, there may not be enough touchdowns to go around. And trusting Bo Nix these days is a bit difficult to do. So Sutton isn't my favorite play this week, but given the matchup against Washington, they've allowed top 4 numbers to receivers this year, I would still start him, but more of a high-end flex option. Definitely a top 30 receiver, though. That's typically a guy you're starting. So not going to overthink it with Sutton, but I do think I prefer Troy Franklin in that offense. So a tier below Sutton is a little less valuable than Troy Franklin. But Keenan Allen, I think, is in the same boat. There's a world where it burns you, but odds are it still pays off and is still a safe start. If you look at the last 4 games for Keenan Allen in this division, he has 3 touchdowns, an average of 7.5 targets, 4.5 catches, and an average of 62 yards per game. So that's 12.9 points per game for Keenan against the Las Vegas Raiders. The matchup against Las Vegas is also top 5 this year. They've been a very good spot, very trustworthy for wide receivers against them. But the problem with Keenan is the volume. Up until that Jaguars game, he had 3 straight matchups with only 5 targets, and he was kind of fading in the offense. But ultimately, I do still trust him a bit more than Quentin Johnston, and I could also see a world where he just gets lucky enough where the touchdowns go to him, and he's a better play than Ladd. So in general, I want to start all 3 Chargers receivers, but Keenan, I think, is much more of a flex play this week, and I do have him 1 spot above Quentin Johnston. I have QJ right behind him in the rankings straight up. I have them both top 20 among the players remaining, but that would be closer to like wide receiver 28, wide receiver 30. There's always risk with the Chargers offense because there's so many mouths to feed, but this matchup is much better for receivers than it is for tight ends. I think the volume that usually goes to a Rondé Gadsden is going to be cut in half, if not more, and offer some padded stats for Quentin Johnston and Keenan Allen. But who do I think is safer? I would still rather go with Keenan than QJ. So Keenan is just the player that I have a soft spot for. He has a longer track record. He's a Hall of Famer, and Quentin Johnston is not. So good luck with Keenan. I could see it burn you, but odds are I think it does pay off. He does play very well, averages double digits against Las Vegas, and I do think a touchdown is most likely going to hit. But Quentin Johnston could outperform him. He had a great game last time against Las Vegas. Back in week 2, Quentin Johnston had 7 targets, 3 catches, 71 yards, and a touchdown. If we go back to last year in week 18, he had his best career game against Las Vegas as well. He had 14 targets, 13 catches, 186 yards, week 18 of last year against the Raiders. So he does step up. As long as it's with Jim Harbaugh, Quentin Johnston actually plays well. So his average against them is 13.7 points. He's playing very well, but a couple big blow-up games kind of skew the stats. And overall, QJ is just that, a boom-bust option. You have the highest upside, potentially of any other player remaining, but you also have one of the lowest floors, and that's where I'd rather go Keenan Allen. I think the floor is higher with Keenan, but Quentin Johnston still very tempting. Odds are I would start him as a good flex play, but at this point, all these players are just average low-end flex plays. They're top 26, but with all the players who already suited up on Thanksgiving and Friday, they are dropping down by at least like 10 spots at this point. They are not quite the same in the rankings as this pyramid would suggest. But this tier, I am still saying, are startable as flex plays. In the top 26 remaining this weekend, I would start these wide receivers at flex. But DK Metcalf, definitely a bit hard to trust these days. And Rodgers, I think, is returning, but against the Bills, I don't even know if that helps him. It could be a big shootout. It could also be a heavy rush attack. The Bills' run defense is terrible. So this could be just like last week where DK just doesn't really contribute because they run it in so often. But I do see some upside as well. I could see him burn the Buffalo secondary pretty easily. He's still pretty talented. And the Steelers also play much better at home this year. So DK, still a decent flex option, but I'd rather go Quentin Johnston. That speaks to how risky he is. I'd also rather go Darnell Mooney and Michael Wilson. Boy, DK, not as safe as he once was, but a player that really is falling down a cliff, and I have no idea what to make of him this week with the third string quarterback. It's Justin Jefferson of the Vikings, and I do not trust Max Brosmer. I didn't really trust JJ McCarthy, but I was giving Jefferson the benefit of the doubt. Still a player I was ranking as someone to start, and at this point, this is the last straw where I still have him as a flex play, but so much further down than where we remember. He should be ranked top 5. That's really where he should be based on draft capital, but I just don't know what to make of the backup quarterback. There's a world where this completely crashes and burns, but there's also a world where he's better than McCarthy was, and maybe I am ranking Jefferson about 10 spots too low in the rankings. There's a world where Jefferson does get back to elite, but I'm not going to bet on it until I see it. This Vikings offense I kind of feel is broken, and against Seattle in this revenge game for Darnold, their defense probably steps up and really shuts down that offense. So he's the only Viking I would even consider this week, but even that feels gross, and that's saying a lot. Given it's Jefferson, you would think he's matchup proof, but I really don't believe that's the case this week. So good luck. At this point, it's one of the lower end flex plays, and I would feel very risky if Jefferson was in my lineup. But the rest of the way, it's not like you feel safer. There's no one more talented than Jefferson remaining. So good luck with Tet, but I wouldn't start him above Jefferson. If we look at this matchup against the Rams, it is starting to get more difficult. It is number 17 on the year. However, it started off as a top 5 spot. It's down to bottom 10 in the last month, and I don't know if Tetero McMillan will be that productive. But the Panthers are just hard to predict. At home, they play better, so maybe that helps them. But the Rams are a good defensive unit, and I could see them really rush the passer. Bryce Young might have a ton of sacks and just be floundering in the pocket, not have any time. So Tet just might not develop his routes down the field. The Rams secondary is getting better, and then Tet is also just really inconsistent. There have been few games where he scores a touchdown. So not going to bet on it most likely this week, but the volume is probably still like 8+ targets, and odds are the floor is okay. We have seen him also be elite at times. 2 weeks ago may have fooled me. Last week I ranked him way too high. So good luck on Tet. Ideally, because they're coming back home to Carolina, he should play better. I think the Panthers have a better offense than they did against the Niners. But John Mechie is a player I think you should be picking up off the wire. If last week was indicative of what to expect, then you're getting at least 7+ targets, and the wide receiver 1 in an offense still has value. So have no idea when Garrett Wilson is returning, but I know that Mechie is the guy in New York as long as he's out. And last 2 games, he has a touchdown, and it looks like Tyrod Taylor likes him a lot. So I think Mechie will continue his dominance until at least week 15. I expect Wilson to remain on IR. And given their record, given what they're fighting for, it's possible they hold out Wilson much longer than that. I think Mechie could be one of those league-winning flex options that you have on your bench down the stretch. At times, I'm not going to endorse him, but this week against the Falcons, I don't fear that defense at all. And if you look at their matchup stats, in the last month, they're allowing top 5 numbers to wide receivers, an average of 169 yards per game, and a total of 6 touchdowns in the last 4 games, a total of 8 in their last 5 games to receivers. So I think that touchdown probably going to hit one more time for Mechie. It does feel very risky, though, and that's why I'd still rather go with Ted McMillan or Justin Jefferson, much more name value and cachet on your team with those options. But Mechie needs to be added off the wire. I did pick him up in my full PPR league, a 12-team format, and I am starting him. I have London and very little depth at receiver, and London's not playing, so Mechie is in the lineup this week. I am starting him, and I'm hoping that last week will hit once again. I like his upside, given the lack of competition. Other than Breece Hall, where else is the ball going to go? So I like Mechie a decent amount, a good flex play, but I'd still rank him below Justin Jefferson and Ted McMillan. But Chimeri DK also in this conversation as well, and has been productive under Cam Ward, the most valuable receiver in Tennessee. And last week he played without Elic Ayamanor, so maybe that was a reason to trust him a little bit extra. However, Ayamanor has not proven anything, and DK has been very reliable when trusted. He is getting the targets, and he is catching it, putting up good yardage as well. So not going to expect a touchdown every week for him, but does have that potential. And similar to Mechie, I think he's an interesting, valuable option. Off the waiver wire, I think this week a very solid flex play. Gonna be in my top 35. On the weekend, with a bunch of players already taken out, he is inside my top 25. Not the worst bet you could make. This weekend, I think he's fine. I don't hate the matchup. I think the volume will be there. Just like Mechie, at least like 7 targets. And he has usually given you about 50+ yards when that happens. So good luck with DK. It feels a bit gross, but I am ranking him above some of these receivers you trust more in bad matchups. Like Pittman usually is ranked top 10, but against Derek Stingley and the Texans, I would fade him heavily. I would rather bench Pittman if I can. A very low-end flex play at best. Let me show you his last 4 games here against the Texans. An average stat line of 8 targets, 4.5 catches, 37 yards, and not a single touchdown in that span. This year, Pittman has been money in the bank in the red zone, a touchdown almost every single week, it seems like. But against the Texans, I would not bet on that to hit. I don't think it'll continue, and his average against them last 4 games in division is 5.9 fantasy points. I don't think that's going up. I would bench Pittman if I can. Gonna need a touchdown. Daniel Jones not 100%. Pittman feels like a major red flag. I would bench him if I could. Just my wide receiver 25 on the weekend. He's behind Mechie and DK. That should tell you all you need to know. I would bench Pittman if I can. But Deebo Samuel, I would also bench if I can. I don't feel safe with Deebo Samuel. And the only silver lining is that Terry McLaurin does come back to the lineup. Terry is expected to play, and that should draw the main Pat Surtain coverage. But the Broncos are still a terrible matchup. Collectively, they're the worst on the year for opposing receivers, and it's not just Pat Surtain why it's a bad matchup. So Deebo, I'd rather go over Terry, but I don't think it's safe at all. With Mariota, he's been much worse, and Jayden Daniels not going to play. He was practicing but already ruled out, so Deebo not as much upside with Mariota this week. So I think I'll pass. I think I'm going to fade him, but if you're desperate, still in the flex conversation, he would be around wide receiver 35, 36 if I had made this video before Thanksgiving. So not the worst play. The volume might be all right. You might still get saved by a touchdown. But at this point, I feel very confident in benching all of these players, and I am not endorsing them at all. You got to be a bit desperate and kind of chasing upside if you're going to start these players. But there is still some talent left on the slate. There is a chance I'm underestimating all these players. But Terry McLaurin in his return, I don't feel super safe with, but his talent's really good, so could still play well against Denver, but I'm assuming he gets the Pat Surtain coverage, so I don't think he's more valuable than Debo this week, and I just told you I'd rather bench Debo if I could. So with Mariota, I think I'll fade him, but there is a world where Terry still cracks 1,000 yards on the season and continues that streak of consecutive 1,000-yard years in the NFL. But if that's going to happen, he's going to go lights out down the stretch. He's going to need like 750 yards to round out the year in these remaining weeks. So doubt that happens, but against Denver, this is not the week where I would expect it to work out. So let's bench him. I'm also ideally going to bench Jayden Higgins. I don't love this matchup against Indianapolis. It's not a great spot. It ranks as the 21st matchup on the year, so that is bottom 12. But if you look closer in the last month, it does rank top 6. There has been some upside as of late. And when you think about Sauce Gardner, he's going to be mostly draped on Nico Collins. So there's a world where his chemistry is just as good with Stroud as it was getting with Davis Mills, and he might still get like 8+ targets, and that might still be hyper valuable in fantasy. But I want to give it one more week with Higgins. Last week I told you he was a more reliable flex play, and I have him ranked around the same area this week. Despite the touchdown, he's been going up and down lately. One great game with a touchdown, one bad game, and last week with a touchdown, it might revert back to a bad performance. So this Colts matchup scares me a little bit. I don't know exactly what his production will be with Stroud, and for all those reasons combined, even though he doesn't get the Sauce Gardner matchup against Charvarius Ward, I would rather fade him. I need him to prove it one more time. I don't feel entirely safe, but he's not the worst bet you could make. Higgins definitely does have some upside if he scores another touchdown. But Josh Downs, I feel a little reluctant to endorse at all. It feels rather risky. But if you look at his stats against Houston, he is the only of the 3 receivers that actually has good stats against Houston. 3 career games, he's averaging 5.7 targets, 3.7 receptions, 65 yards, and a touchdown. Last time he played Houston, he had 4 catches, 109 yards, and a touchdown. He played very, very well on limited receptions, but he did have 9 targets as well in that game. So that was pretty key, and he had less than a 50% catch percentage. The Texans are still a really tough matchup, but the nickel corner is not as difficult as some of the other corners that the Texans have. Their top nickel, Jalen Petrie, has been out for several weeks now. So Downs, I think, gets the easiest break, but typically I trust Pittman more, so I still rank Pittman above him. But I think there is a world where if there's only one Colts receiver this week that is productive, it might be Josh Downs. I'd rather go Downs this week than Alec Pierce, but as much as I'm downgrading Pittman, I'd still rather go Pittman above Downs. And if I'm benching Pittman this week, I'm still benching Downs. I don't trust Daniel Jones that much against Houston, but they will still move the ball. It's still the Shane Steichen Colts offense, and they've been productive this year. I think Downs still has some upside, but no floor. He's been terrible his last 2 games. And then Kayshon Boutte was pretty bad in his return, so don't know if I trust the Patriots passing game yet. I think I only trust Diggs. And while there is upside for Boutte, you need a house call, and odds are that's just a bit too unlikely to hit. So let's bench him. I want to see Boutte get back into the end zone before I trust him more consistently. But there is still league-winning upside with Kayshon Boutte down the stretch. If the Patriots aren't a run-first team off the bye in Week 14, then maybe in the playoffs, Boutte is going to be a top 30 player. But Tez Johnson, I think, has the same argument to be started as Kayshon Boutte. You're just hoping for the house call touchdown. And the upside with Tez is pretty high. He's pretty fast. But with Bucky coming back to the offense, they probably run the ball a little extra. And then the Arizona Cardinals defense is at times a bit difficult. So now that Godwin's healthy, I don't trust Tez enough. I'd rather bench him, but just like Booty, there is upside where you might get like a 40-yard touchdown. With Baker, anything is possible in that offense. So good luck if you're going to start Tez Johnson, but it feels like a Hail Mary. And then starting the backup Jags receivers also feels like a bit of a Hail Mary. But I do trust Parker Washington a bit more than Jacoby Myers because Parker Washington has been with the team longer. But with Thomas coming back to the lineup, even though this matchup is elite, I don't know what to make of it. There's going to be at least one, if not two, Jags receivers that play well. But with Strange coming back to the lineup and Thomas also healthy, I do not know who that's going to be, and I could see either Washington or Myers play lights out or like dog shit. So you can totally get burned. I don't think it's safe. I would keep him on the bench. I have Myers on my own team, and I am going to bench him this week, despite needing a backup for Omarion Hampton in my lineup. I have Myers and Jayden Higgins. I am going with Higgins personally over Jacoby Myers. And I don't feel good about either Jags receiver, but I think Parker Washington has been safer on the year, where I think he has more of a lockdown role. I think Trevor Lawrence trusts him a little bit more, but Myers is more talented. Myers has more experience. They traded for him, so they are committed to him. And there's a world where I'm totally wrong, and Myers is the one you want. But because Thomas is there, it's all just a little too tricky to know what you're going to get. I'd fade all of them. I think at this point, you want to be benching all these receivers. So if I'm benching them, I'm definitely benching all of these players in tier 6. But if you're super desperate, there's always a chance that you do get a very nice touchdown that does save you at the end of the day. And maybe bet on that with Sam Darnold in his revenge game. There's always some upside against Minnesota. I could see the Seahawks play lights out and drop like 40 points on offense. So Kupp has been okay at times, but in general, way too risky to trust. I would bench him for sure. And then Alec Pierce has one like deep touchdown with Anthony Richardson last year, but otherwise has done nothing against Houston. So I would bench him entirely. I don't think this is the game for him. I think Josh Downs is the only Colts backup receiver I'd be tempted with. And even him, no thanks. I'm benching all 3 Colts receivers if I can this week. And then Juwan Jennings, I hate this week in bad weather. I don't trust Purdy at all. And he needs a touchdown, and I don't think it hits against the Browns. They've become a very difficult matchup as of late. On the year, the Browns are the 5th most difficult matchup against receivers. So already a big downgrade. The weather's even more of a downgrade. No thank you on Juwan Jennings. I think you should bench him. But there's a chance I'm underestimating Darius Slayton a little too much. With Jackson Dart, I think he has better chemistry than Isaiah Hodgins, but Slayton has been banged up and dealing with a hamstring injury, might be holding him back. The Jackson Dart offense, though, does have upside this week, and I could see him score from like 40 yards out. There will be like a deep shot waiting for Slayton at some point, but there's also a chance that Hodgins is more valuable, so for that reason, I would bench him. I don't trust the volume incoming for Slayton, and given Godwin is not the same this year, I don't trust him either. He's back on the field, and against the Cardinals, there's shootout potential. But even when he's gotten good volume, he's failed to go over like 30 yards. So no thanks on Godwin. I think it's too risky. And with the backup quarterback in Addison, I'm going to say F no. I'm only trusting Jefferson, and even that feels gross as fuck. So let's ignore Addison this week. I have no idea what you're going to get from Brosmer. Against the Seahawks, that's a terrible matchup. I will pass. No thanks on Addison. But in Las Vegas, the last offense with some number 1 receivers I haven't ranked yet, I got Trey Tucker over Lockett this week because Lockett was added to the injury report. He was full Wednesday, limited Thursday, so a downgrade at his age is really not something you want to see. And although he was overtaking Trey Tucker, this week I'd rather go Tucker than Lockett because of the injury. So good luck there, but the Chargers are a bad matchup. The second worst spot for receivers this year. Very limited points with Las Vegas, but now that they've fired Chip Kelly, maybe the offense does improve. I doubt it. I still think the Chargers defense plays lights out, but Tucker, I think, is a bit more interesting than Tyler Lockett. And now lastly, in tier 7, we are really scraping the bottom of the barrel. There is no chance in hell I would recommend any of these players, but who knows? In DFS, there's a world where they move the needle. But I'm going to avoid that windy matchup in Cleveland altogether this week. I don't trust Shedeur Sanders with Judy at the moment. While there is some upside down the field with Shedeur, Judy had that fumble, and then the wind, I think, is really going to limit the passing game entirely. So let's ignore this matchup. I have no confidence even Juwan Jennings, I had a hard time ranking a tier above. I wanted to put Juwan even lower because the weather, I think, scares me too much. So no thanks with a Browns receiver. I think they just run the ball this week, so let's fade and bench Jerry Jeudy. I'm also going to bench Ricky Pearsall. He's done nothing since coming back, and the weather, I think, was really going to impact Brock Purdy as well. So no thanks in this game. I don't want a single receiver at all. But Leggett has had some upside at times, but it's so hard to trust. I don't think Bryce Young will play well enough, so I'm not going to start anyone other than Tet. I don't feel great about starting Tet in the first place, so definitely going to bench Xavier Leggett. But Malik Washington, I think, has no value now that Darren Waller has returned. Waller will score those touchdowns that I was hoping could go to Malik, and those weren't even hitting for Washington. So no thanks on him. Now that Waller's back, the volume won't be safe enough. You're not getting more than like 5.5 points on average from Malik Washington. No thanks with him. But I could be wrong on Isaiah Hodgins, where he's actually more valuable than Slayton. So I do have Slayton a tier above, but I do think a second Giants wide receiver could have value. Last 2 games, it's been Isaiah Hodgins, but last 2 games has also been a Jameis Winston offense in New York. So I think that practice squad chemistry, the backups definitely have an advantage together. So that chemistry I don't think is repeatable with Jackson Dart. For that reason, I'd rather go Slayton than Isaiah Hodgins, but Hodgins has 2 straight games with a touchdown. I could be wrong. He might be better than Slayton. But Greg Dortch falls down to tier 7 because I assume Marvin Harrison Jr. comes back to the lineup. He does have 2 games with a touchdown as well, so maybe that turns into 3, but in general, the volume is just so unreliable. I would bench him. I do feel good about Michael Wilson, but I don't feel good enough about Greg Dortch. But maybe Harrison doesn't play. Harrison still not a lock to suit up. And if that's not the case, I would bump up Dortch probably above Kayshon Boutte. I think Dortch would be in the same territory as guys like Downs, Boutte, and Tez Johnson. I think he'd move up 2 full tiers, and then I'd have Michael Wilson up above Nico Collins. I think Michael Wilson would be top 5 if Harrison wasn't going to play, but I am assuming Harrison does play, so Wilson, a decent wide receiver 2, and then Dortch, I think a low-end must bench wide receiver 5 in fantasy this week. But Rashid Shaheed has some upside because of that Darnold revenge narrative, but his value in this offense has yet to materialize. He is not playing well enough as of yet, despite his understanding of the Clint Kubiak offense. Darnold doesn't have good chemistry enough yet. They are not clicking down the field. So no thanks on Shaheed, and no thanks with a lower end Patriots wideout, but that offense is crowded. There's a chance I'm wrong on Diggs and Boutte this week, and maybe Pop Douglas does get lucky and catches a deep touchdown. But in general, Mac Hollins is a bit safer for that. But now that Boutte is back, Hollins is definitely off the field more. Hollins is the least valuable of the 4, but Pop Douglas still pretty unvaluable. So that is it for my wide receiver rankings. These are the top 52 remaining on the weekend. And to be honest, I feel like the only names on this chart that are really going to be in your lineup are really the top 25. I think once you hit Pittman, that's kind of the cutoff point. I feel like I'd much rather bench everyone beyond that point. It feels really bad in some gross matchups. It feels kind of strange to tell you that even Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin have no value this week. But I don't think it's worth your time. I think I want to be benching them, and players like Higgins and Downs and everyone behind them, you are really just hoping for a touchdown. And if it hits, I think you got more lucky than knew what you were doing. It feels unlikely that any of them pay off. With Higgins, at least there's some volume lately, but I don't love the matchup, and it's been an up and down season for him. If I knew that Stroud trusted him, I'd probably have Jayden Higgins ranked a bit higher, but there's the same risk reward ratio in that tier. 27 through 35 are the last flex plays I'm really considering. But Downs, bad matchup, just sometimes plays well against the Texans. Maybe you'll trust it. Boutte feels like a desperation swing. Same with Tez Johnson and either of the Jags backups. But the matchup for Washington and Myers is phenomenal. There's a chance that Brian Thomas lets the volume go elsewhere, and maybe they're better. But really, I'm trusting the top 25 a lot more. Like in the top 11, they're all in your lineup. Even Troy Franklin, I would start. Everyone above him, I think, is a lock based on how they played. And then good wide receiver 2s, high-end flex plays. We got Diggs, Olave, Thomas, Mooney, Michael Wilson, Sutton, and Keenan. I trust them enough. Their matchups are also pretty good this week. I think they're all going to get the volume you're looking for. But the higher end flex plays are where it gets tricky, and some of them feel really gross. Like QJ can always burn you. DK, not really living up to the hype. Jefferson, don't trust the quarterback at all, so that's holding him back. Tet, also hard to trust the quarterback, but at times really plays better than you'd think. And then Mechie and DK, such gross names, but at the end of the day, number one receivers in their offenses, and the matchups aren't bad. They're not terrible starts. I think they're fine flex plays. I'm actually starting Mechie myself, but Pittman against Derek Stingley, that feels gross. Such a bad matchup. And then Debo and Terry against Surtain and the Broncos. At that point, I feel like that's the cutoff. So good luck at receiver. If you still have questions, let me know in the comments below. But that's it for this video. My name is Adam Riancho, and subscribe for more content like this. Tomorrow, I'll give you all the quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings along with injury updates. We'll give you the final rankings at every position. So I'll see y'all next time. My name's Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.